Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 1. Now let's start the fanfic. The night was calm with a small breeze blowing through the young, 20-year-old, boy's hair. He was lying in the grass with a young, also 20-year-old, black-haired girl in his arms. Her dull pink eyes stared lovingly into his violet orbs. She kissed his cheeks softly before laying her head down onto his bare and sweaty chest. The battle scars from the war evident on both of their bodies, but neither seemed to care. An orange Konoha Junin flak jacket with green border with an orange and gold plate lay over on the side next to a brown Iwagakure Junin flak jacket with a black plate lying on top. Two katanas were stabbed into the ground with their blades crossing over each other. On the ground in front of the two weapons were two different hitai, one with a leaf symbol and the other had two rocks etched into the metal plate. Naruto took a deep breath before opening his eyes once more to stare at the giant moon above the two. Its bright white light bathed the secret lovers in its ethereal glow. Not much could be said, beside the fact that she was supposed to be his arch-nemesis. She was known as the Lava Princess by her enemies. Her name is Kurotsuchi, the Princess of Iwagakure. Naruto sighed. He glared at the moon above him and the stars that glinted in the deep black sky of the night. He tightened his grip around the beautiful and curvaceous girl in his arms. She snuggled deeper into his body and sighed in bliss before drifting off back to sleep. To see her so calm and snug made Naruto's heart beat faster. To see her smile made his mind hazy. Why can't I live my life with her? Naruto cursed. Kami, why can't I love her the way I want to? Why did we have to be enemies? Backwards time skip start 20.5 years ago, Konohagakure no Sato. Minato. Get the seal ready and hold the Kyuubi back for now. Jiraiya ordered to his son. We have to make sure there are no complications with the birth of your children. Hi, Tu-san. Minato sped through hand seals and placed his hands onto the belly of his wife Kushina. She gave a weak smile to her husband and grabbed a hold of her best friend, Makoto's sleeve. With the friendship between the Senju and Uchiha stronger than metal, the Uchiha made sure to keep the Hokage's children's birth safe. Uchiha guards and clansmen stood outside of the hospital and on the roof to make sure the royal family were safe. The current Hokage, Tsunade Senju, the mother of Minato, was working on making sure Kushina wouldn't have any issues, along with the Kyuubi trying to make sure his container wouldn't die from the strain. Tsunade wiped the sweat from her brow and continued to examine the pregnant woman as she continued to push out the twins. Come on Kushi-chan. You're almost there. Makoto smiled as she tightened her hold on Kushina's hand. Just another push and the first one will be out. Come on. Minato strained. From 5 different points around the operating table sat 5 men, 3 Senju sealing specialists, Jiraiya and Minato. They each held up a different hand seal with an aura of chakra surrounding their bodies. The amount of power being pumped into the ceiling. Minato struggled to keep his chakra flow constant, despite the fact that he himself had large chakra reservoirs. Suddenly, the sound of a crying baby sounded in everyone's ears. The sealers shut off their chakra flow and ran up to see Tsunade and Makoto holding 2 babies. One had golden blonde hair with vibrant violet eyes with 6 whisker mars, while the other had red hair with bright cerulean eyes like her father. Tsunade and Makoto showed Kushina her new children and smiled happily. Naruto, Kushina named the blonde. Kaide, she named the redhead. Makoto held Kaide out and let Kushina take her daughter and Tsunade lightly placed Naruto into the redhead's arms. Kushina smiled in bliss as she held her 2 children in her arms as tightly as possible. Her smile never left her face. They're so adorable, Tsunade smiled. Now, let's let her have her rest. We'll speak about the Kyuubi on a later date. In Kushina's mindscape, The most beautiful redhead of Konoha walked calmly through her mindscape with little care and came across a large house in the middle of a forest. Kushina shook her head when she smelled the smoke coming from the chimney. She opened the door and found a giant fox in a large robe over pajamas sitting in a recliner chair. He had a pipe in his mouth with a pair of spectacles to help him read whatever book he was reading. Ika Ika Paradise. A ride in heaven. What the air you doing reading that hideous smut? Kushina screamed in anger, terrifying the great fox from his reed, causing him to throw the book from his hands and spit his pipe from his lips. The great fox blushed slightly and looked nervous. I don't know what you're talking about, Kushina. The Kyuubi laughed slightly at his little sister figure. I don't know what you mean by smut. Is that a new word? Doesn't matter. Kushina laughed while still retaining her deadpan expression. Down to business. What are we going to do about you, Kurama? You had twins, right? The fox asked as he sat back down into his recliner chair. Yes. Kushina said. Do you have a plan? I do indeed. Kurama smiled slightly. It will empower both of them. What is it? I want Minato to split my chakra in half. My yang chakra will go to Naruto and my yin will go to Kaide. Kurama said before laying his head down on the chair. That's their names, right? Yes, it is. Kushina smiled. I like this plan. When do you want it to happen? Whenever you're ready. Kurama replied. Just as long as I get to take my normal nap. You're a lazy fox. You know that, don't you? Kushina asked with a small laugh. Whatever you say, Kushi-chan. Kurama yawned and cut off their connection. Kushina awoke in her hospital bed with her two newborn babies in cribs next to her own bed. Thousands of miles to the northwest. Through the many rocks, crevices and mountain ranges, the deep ravines and rock rain, there was a village hidden by the rocks and mountains that surrounded it. Its people were strong-willed just like the immovable rocks that they build their homes in. The people were celebrating the birth of life. The greatest gift from the kamis above, especially since the ruling family of the village was dying out. Kitsuchi Yamauchi of the Yamauchi dynasty of Iwagakure, the current Tsuchikage, raised his newest child before the people. Born just hours before the dawn of October 6, she was named Kurotsuchi, Black Soil. Next to Kitsuchi, in his wife's arms was Han, their 2-year-old son. The people praised the birth of a new child, and immediately showered the family with gifts and prayers for the new child. Within a few days of the child being born, she already had powerful chakra residing within her. Kitsuchi had the baby tested for special chakra, and indeed she did have special chakra. She had received a mutation of Jinten, dust release, and received the Yuten, lava release, Kekkei Genkei. Kitsuchi himself was a receiver of Bakuden, or explosion release. But he had a strange feeling that his daughter was going to be able to do more than just that. He shook his head from the thoughts and immediately turned from the people and headed back into the Tsuchikage palace. The walls of the palace itself were carved from the mountain itself. Once they entered the courtyard of the castle, there was a large garden, despite being in the most improper place to grow plants. Trees and flowers of varying rarity. From rare to almost non-existent. At the front gates of the walls, there were infantry with ashigaru helmets with the kanji for earth on their helmets. In their hands they held naganatas and had katanas strapped to their sides. When the royal Kage family walked by, the guards tensed up and stood in parade dress. Kitsuchi nodded his head and walked straight into the main hall. The walls were adorned with traditional paintings and racks filled with weapons. There were multiple halls that lead through to the different parts of the castle. Each one filled with servants, guards or his Junin commanders. He turned to his wife and handed her his daughter and walked off towards the more secluded part of the mountain palace. After a few minutes of trekking and swiveling through the different halls and rooms, he came across a massive vault that had 20 guards standing in the front. 10 explosion release shinobi and 10 lava release shinobi. They stood guard and made sure that no one could come anywhere near the vault. But once they saw their Tsuchikage, they all parted and motioned for the seals on the gate to be undone. Is it time already? A deep and foreboding voice sounded from within the darkness. I was just started to enjoy my nap. Oh, shut up. Anything will be better than this. Another voice said from the darkness, though not as malicious and with a faint feminine tone. Kitsuchi shrugged off the killing intent and pure unkempt power and walked into the vault. Once inside, the darkness soon cleared out and the colors began to flow into his eyes. Standing in front of him was a massive 5-tailed dolphin horse and an 8-tailed wolf. The only 2 biju that Iwa managed to find and make deals with. My daughter has been born and is ready for sealing. Kitsuchi said. My son is more than ready, so I believe that it is time for us to make our strike against those, tree-hugging, Konoha scum. Indeed, Kitsuchi-kun, the 8-tailed wolf smiled slightly. But, we should wait a few years until then. Time skip, 16 years later, Konohagakure no Sato. 16 years since the birth of Naruto and Kaide, Kushina and Jiraiya had been training the two in the arts of controlling their biju's powers. Even though the 2 halves of Kurama willingly gave their chakra to the 2 containers, the fox's power was still too much for the 2 children to handle. So for a majority of their life, they were subjugated to rigorous training in the shinobi arts, proper etiquette, and educated by the highest level of educators. Naruto took more to being a shinobi than being the proper prince that everyone wanted him to be. He was a powerhouse with nearly infinite chakra reserves. Too bad he couldn't control it yet. He grew his hair out like his father had and had 2 long bangs framing his face. His skin was pale like his mother's and his eyes were dark and violet like his mother's, but his face was his father's and his hair was his father's. He was quite tall for his age group, standing at 5 feet 10 inches, he was muscular and had a strong build despite his age. At the young age of 12, Naruto had already mastered the Rasengan and was working on making an elemental version of it. He not only did that, but he mastered a massive arsenal of wind and lightning jutsu, with his favorite wind technique being the Fuden Dai Renkuden wind release, great drilling air bullet, and seemed to have mastered the Hiraishin. He also took on Kenjutsu just like his mother and was already at master level, thanks to the training regimen that Minato's personal Anbu trainers put the young prince through. When the Anbu found out about his elements, they were surprised at the fact that the 2 elements he had control over cancelled each other out. It was not only a rarity, but also almost impossible to happen. No, it is impossible to happen, but somehow, Naruto was able to do it. Throughout his training and combat prowess, he became almost as fast as his old man himself. Because of this, he was called the Kogen no Oji, or the Golden Prince. He studied, despite being like his mother, he managed to make it through all of the royalty lifestyle and history of the Senju. He was taught to respect his elders and respect the Uchiha. Through all of this, Naruto wasn't alone. He always had his twin sister Kaide at his side. While she was a very talented kunoichi, she took to being a princess more than being a trained killer, even thought she was really good at it. She preferred to be a fuinjutsu specialist if anything. She, like the true Uzumaki she was, felt a natural pull towards the art of seals. She made her first fully functioning trapping seal when she was only 5 years old. Even though she wasn't one to actually hurt another human, she was a master with fire and she was also a gifted sensory shinobi that can sense anyone within a mile radius. Though she was slow compared to her twin, she packed a punch like her mother and grandmother. With her near-perfect chakra control thanks to being trained as a medic and sensory type, she gained recognition as a support-type powerhouse. She had also taken up Kenjutsu but not for the same reasons as Naruto. She took up Kenjutsu for one reason. Uchiha Sasuke. The Uchiha was a very powerful and tough boy. He and Naruto had also gained a close bond that has the same effect of brotherhood. Kaide met Sasuke and the two immediately became friends. Sasuke, being an Uchiha prodigy child like his elder brother was, he had unlocked the fully matured three-tomoed Sharingan by the age of 7. He was also smart about what he did, and he was slightly conceited. Not only that, but he had a natural talent for kenjutsu and fire techniques. He was quick on his feet, though not as fast as Naruto was. Sasuke was so graceful with his movements that he was able to impress Kaide, who made a name for herself being the next Ice Queen. The Uchiha had a natural talent for using whatever weapon you gave him, be it a bow and arrow, or just the bow, he'd be able to take down an entire unit of experienced shinobi and infantry. Sasuke, even though he normally didn't show it, he did feel a small crush on Naruto's sister. She liked to eat, she could hold her own in battle and she was gorgeous. Sasuke thought to himself, what's not to like? He just didn't say anything about it because he was trying to keep impressing the Hokage and his wife. As it was, Sasuke was poised to be arranged to marry the princess to strengthen the ties between the Uchiha and Senju, while Naruto was already engaged to Yamanaka Ino, since they were children. Elsewhere in Iwagakure no Sato, Kitsuchi used the past 16 years for meticulous planning and preparation for the coming war between his nation and Minato's. Kitsuchi narrowed his eyes at the war table in front of him. Already many of his pieces were in place, but he was delayed. He needed more time, which was something that he didn't have the luxury of. Already his daughter was learning the secrets of Jinten and mastering her Uten from his father, and he himself was teaching her Bakuten. She was by far the most powerful kunoichi of the 5 villages of Iwa. She showed extreme skill in kenjutsu and had defeated her first enemy division when she was only 7 years old during a war with a neighboring nation. She was also getting quite beautiful, taking on the beautiful looks of her mother, with the strength and power of her father. She had the eyes of her mother, dull pink eyes that held so much emotion and smugness in her attitude. She had a quick tongue and a quicker fist. She was highly proficient in taijutsu in her Kekkei Genkai and Kekkei Toda. As the time for war came closer and closer, Kitsuchi became more and more worried that his daughter would get distracted and lose her touch, especially if the rumors of this Kogen no Oji were true. His daughter was 16 and was at that dangerous age when hormones start messing with teenagers' heads and cause them to lose their combat effectiveness. The Yamauchi name was on the line this time. He couldn't afford to have his daughter fail to keep the enemies of Iwa at bay, let alone fall for her enemies. Kitsuchi then thought back towards his son's abilities and smiled slightly, before letting it falter. Han was indeed a powerful boy and a giant one at that, but he relied on the power of his Biju too much. The Biju itself started to mess with the boy's head and made Han go on rampages at random intervals year-round. Han, though, had somehow received Joden steam release, and used his steam to aid his special taijutsu style. The secret to the two children's powers and strengths was the 2 Biju sealed within them. Han had the 5-tailed dolphin horse, Kokuo, while Kurotsuchi held the great 8-tailed wolf, Kuyoko. The 2 Jinchuriki were masters of their Biju and used their powers to their fullest extent whenever in combat. At least Kurotsuchi knew what to do. Kitsuchi took a deep breath and sighed in exasperation. He had read over a proposition by the Kamizuru clan to wed Kurotsuchi to his youngest son, Jibaki. The man sighed and scratched his brow in frustration. It seems that it would be the best way to get the Kamizuru clan on his side for the coming war. It can't be helped, I know she'll understand. Kitsuchi signed the proposition. The village comes before personal gain. Akiyama, Kitsuchi shouted. A man dressed in the Junin outfit of Iowa, burst through the door and bowed to his cage. Kitsuchi handed the shinobi the scroll and had the shinobi take off from the office. Everything is going to plan. Kitsuchi smiled brightly. Now the Yamauchi will finally rise to the top and defeat the Senju of Konoha. A few months later, Naruto ni? Kaide asked. Naruto ni? Kaide asked once more. Naruto ni? Kaide screamed in the golden-haired boy's face, scaring him from his thoughts. What is it, Kaide-chan? Naruto asked as he looked up from his position on the ground next to his sister. The Namikaze twins sat on a large hill with a single tree standing at the crest of the hill overlooking a large park that Kaide happened to love so much. This tree was where Naruto had asked Ino to marry him. This was the tree that had the three young adults coming to over and over again, to help make it grow, and good thing too. It had a beautiful view of the 6 villages, in all directions. They had a perfect 360-degree view of the splendor that Konoha and her 6 villages could offer. Naruto-kun, how do you feel about our marriage? Ino asked with a small smile. A small blush formed on her cheeks as she locked her arm with his. The two have been dating for the past 6 years. They found out about their secret engagement on their 3rd year of their relationship. To find out that they were getting married in the future was enough to make the two ecstatic. Are you excited? Of course I am. Naruto smiled brightly. He leaned down and planted a small kiss on his girlfriend's forehead and leaned back down into the soft grass below him. How can I not be? Naruto, how do you feel about me and Kaide? Sasuke asked. What about it? Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. Do you, well, approve? Kaide asked. I approve, Sasuke. Just don't screw up. Cause, Kaide, well, she hits harder than I do. Naruto took a moment to laugh at Sasuke's expression. Soon enough, the rest of the children present burst into laughter. Naruto-sama, Kaide-sama. An exasperated shout was heard coming up the hill. Hokage-sama and Kushina-sama need you two in the palace as fast as possible. Understood. At the Hokage palace. What is it, father? Kaide asked. We are gearing for war, Minato said calmly. Iwa is becoming extremely militant. Naruto, Kaide, it's good to see you too. A voice sounded from behind. Both heads turned and smiled at the man behind them. Ero Gigi. The two ran up to the old man and embraced him in a tight hug. Jiraiya had a blank expression on his face when he realized the nickname that they just gave him. For the past 9 years, they've been calling the old Sannin that nickname, and everyone seems to love it, except for Jiraiya. The name seemed extremely fitting for the old man. After the hugs were over, they backed away and let the old man walk over next to the throne of Minato. So, Ero Gigi, how is Iwa getting militant? Naruto asked. They are tearing through Taki no Kuni and Kawa no Kuni without any care. Jiraiya said. Not only that, but they are getting dangerously close to our interests. Who are their VISs, very important shinobi? Kaide asked. They call them the Lava Princess and the Steam Prince. Jiraiya said. They are both Jinchuriki of 2 different Biju, the 8-tailed wolf, and the 5-tailed dolphin horse. What? Kaide went pale. They must be a part of the royal family of Iwa. They are. Minato said. Yamauchi Kurotsuchi aka the Lava Princess is the youngest daughter of Yamauchi Kitsuchi. Yamauchi Han aka the Steam Prince is the eldest son of Kitsuchi. The two of them are extremely powerful. Here, Minato tossed his 2 children a bingo book. Naruto opened the bingo book and turned to the Lava Princess. Yamauchi Kurotsuchi. Height. 5 feet 3 inches. Hair color. Black. Eye color. Dull pink. Appearance. Wears the maroon kimono of Iwa underneath a brown Iwa flak jacket and wears a black plate of armor over the vest. Wears short shorts with fishnet leggings and black shin guards. Rank. SS classed. Info. Knows Jinten techniques, highly proficient in Yuden techniques and is learning Bakuden. She is a master with her Tanto knife. She likes to toy with her opponents and doesn't take her enemies seriously. Run on sight. Do not engage. For Anbu leveled shinobi or higher. She will kill with no remorse. Naruto continued to stare at her picture. She looked beautiful with her heart-shaped jawline and her pinkish eyes. She had a smirk on her face. It looked like the same kind of smile that Naruto would have when he'd take down a team of Anbu in training. He looked over the picture and realized that she was hot. He looked up to see his father with a disapproving look. Naruto. She is the enemy. I know that she's beautiful, but you must steel your resolve. Make sure that you don't fall for whatever lies or seductions that she might have planned out for you, my son. Minato said sagely. You and your sister will move into Taki no Kuni and help them in their fight against Iwa, but do it secretly and wear masks. I don't want Iwa getting an idea of what we're doing. For this mission, you two are officially promoted to Junin rank. Be careful and be safe. And don't use Kurama's power. Understood, father. Naruto and Kaide both bowed and left the throne room, leaving Jiraiya and Minato alone. Do you think the two of them can do it? Jiraiya asked. I don't know. Minato sighed. I just hope that his Hiraishin is better than mine. In the Taki no Kuni. Yuden. Udangan no Jutsu. A feminine shout resounded through the air, scaring a few Taki shinobi. Just before they could escape, the fast-flying bullets shot through the air and bored holes into their bodies. Flank them from the right. My brother and I will handle these guys. Kurotsuchi commanded. There was a slight rumble and a gargantuan boy with a massive hat and armor with a furnace on his back, rose from beneath the ground and held up his fists. His pinkish eyes were emotionless as he examined his enemies. The duo charged forward with 8 tails swinging behind Kurotsuchi and 5 tails, each tail with elements coming off the tips, behind Han. But before the 2 Jinchuriki could meet their mark, 2 flashes were made and 2 people flashed into the fight and kicked the 2 Iwa shinobi back. One wore a gold-orange plate over a black undershirt with a mask covering his upper face. They couldn't even see his eyes. The only facial features that they were able to make out were the whisker marks on his cheeks and his bright golden hair. On his neck guards were 6 Magatama pendants jingling off the edge. He smiled at Kurotsuchi with a small foxy smirk before charging at the 8-tailed Jinchuriki. Kuro sent a punch, but the masked shinobi dodged at the last second and sent a side hook to her abdomen, knocking her over on her side. She stumbled slightly when she hit the ground. She quickly spun around with a handful of shuriken and kunai and hurled them at the shinobi, but the other masked attacker came and deflected the projectiles with her katana. The masked kunoichi kicked Kuro back and caused her to land in her brother's arms. Han growled at the 2 masked newcomers. Steam started flowing from the furnace on his back. He furrowed his brows as the steam gained a thicker volume as his Biju's chakra began to meld with the steam. The masked kunoichi wore a black version of the white upper half mask of the golden-haired shinobi. She herself was a redhead with whisker marks on her cheeks. The thing that made Kurotsuchi jealous, though, was the size of her chest. It was quite impressive, despite being only 16. Her orange-red plate only seemed to glint in the sun's rays cutting through the leaves of the forest canopy. Who are you? Kurotsuchi asked with narrowed eyes. Her Biju's chakra began to flow from her body and began to form a superheated chakra aura around her. And why did you interfere? That is none of your business. The masked shinobi replied. He drew out his katana and pointed it at Kuro. Imoto, the black-haired one is mine. As you wish, Ni-san. The red-headed kunoichi replied as she zoomed off with her own sword drawn. The redhead charged off towards Han at speeds that were hard for him to catch up to, but they weren't entirely fast. Just as the kunoichi was about to hit Han, a blast of lava sent her back, but didn't seem to affect her. Your opponent is me, the golden-haired shinobi shouted as he swung for Kuro's neck. She bent back and spun on one foot and swiveled around the golden-haired boy's attack. Kurotsuchi then focused chakra into her fist and punched the armored shinobi, but it had no effect. The masked man kicked her back and sent her into the forest. Naruto popped his next and shunshine to her position. Once he found her, she was pushing herself out of a dented tree. Once free, she glared intently at the golden-haired boy. She quickly sped through hand seals. Udangan no Jutsu. She shouted as a barrage of super-fast lava bullets shot from her mouth and headed straight for the masked shinobi. He made a few backflips and landed on the branch of a high tree. After speeding through similar hand seals, he shot his hand to his mouth. Suidangan no Jutsu. He shot off a perfect amount of bullets from his mouth, and each projectile collided with her own and they both cancelled each other's attacks. Kurotsuchi gathered chakra to her feet and dashed towards Naruto, slightly freaking him out with her speed. She saw the opening and took it. Lava built up in her fist as she hurled the right hook into his abdomen. The burning sensation seared into his body and sent him flying back into a few trees. The black-haired Iowa princess back flipped off the branch and landed with quiet grace. She patted her legs down softly and kept her wry smirk on her face. Clink. You know, pride is a weakness. Naruto whispered in her ear. That over there was a cage bunshin. Nice try, but even you must have known that it was too easy. Kurotsuchi tailed her eyes down to see a kunai held at her throat. She took a calm breath and shut her eyes to think. Solar plexus. The girl elbowed Naruto in the chest and sent him back, causing him to lose his grip on her body. Instep. She raised her foot and brought it down on his not-so-protected right foot. The boy hunched over slightly to feel his aching foot. Nose. As Naruto came down, she sent her palm up and smashed it across his face, breaking his nose and crushing his mask in the process. Groin. As the shinobi fell back, she reeled her foot back and hurled it towards his unprotected groin. Once the hit connected, Naruto let out a girlish scream and fell to the ground rolling around in pain as tears poured from his eyes. His right hand covering his groin and his left holding his broken nose. Quote! Naruto howled in pain. I was trying to be nice, but his poor voice was now a few octaves higher than normal. Kurotsuchi smirked and kicked the boy over and looked at his face. Vibrant purple eyes glared viciously at the kunoichi. It seemed to entrance the young princess. But then she realized who it was. It's the Golden Prince of Konoha. Kurotsuchi's eyes went wide as her brows furrowed deeper. You bastard. She raised her sword and stabbed it through Naruto's heart. The boy gurgled in pain as blood began to flow from his mouth and out of the massive wound in his chest. Kurotsuchi tore the blade from his chest and spat on the ground. She looked at his dead body with a never-ending glare. I can't believe that Konoha would send these worthless minions to fight us. Kurotsuchi growled. Who the hell do they think we are? I'm no minion, as you can see. Kurotsuchi's eyes went wide. I just killed you. Naruto smiled as he jumped down a tree and landed just a few feet away from Kurotsuchi. It'll take more than just a simple katana going through my heart to stop me. Naruto said with a wry tone. You're way out of my league, Yugenheim. Well then, Kogen Oji, why don't I show you my true league? 4 Kurotsuchis jumped from her body and charged at Naruto. 4 Cage Bunshin popped into existence and battled with her clones. But the special thing about these clones was that they were a trade secret from Iwa's explosion division. It was one of their most powerful weapons, that weren't a part of their kinjutsu. Bakuten. Baku Bunshin no Jutsu. The clones suddenly exploded, sending the Kogen no Oji through the trees and into a large clearing. Naruto glared as he cleaned the dirt and dust off of his armor. That was a clever trick, Yugenheim, Naruto drawled. But you'll have to do better than that. Naruto snapped his fingers. Why'd he do that? Suddenly, a large series of explosions shook the entire forest, tearing the landscape apart, sending earth, debris and Kurotsuchi high into the sky. She landed a few meters off the ground thanks to the flying jutsu that she learned from her grandfather. She looked from her viewpoint in the sky to see that almost the entire forest was torn apart by the Kogen. Unbelievable, she panted. I almost died from that. He had this all planned out, didn't he? Try this on for size, bastard. Kurotsuchi held her hands together and focused her chakra together, and once she opened her hands, a small three-dimensional cone formed in her palms. Jinten. Hakuri no Jutsu. The cone expanded and shot for the Golden Prince. He only smiled and drew out a three-pronged Hiraishin kunai. The knife floated for a while, as the blonde sped through some quick hand seals. Just as he finished, he grabbed the kunai and held open his palms. Right before Kurotsuchi's attack could hit its mark, the attack was edged into a massive portal as seal matrices spread around the attack and disappeared altogether. Kuro panted slightly in anger and floated down to meet Naruto face to face. The two glared each other eye to eye before taking off with amazing speed in both of their legs. Naruto, of course, made it to her first and appeared at her side with his fist ready. He sent the punch, but Kurotsuchi evaded the attack at the right moment, just before the fist could hit its mark. Kurotsuchi smirked at her plan, but she didn't take into consideration Naruto's foot coming her way. The blonde's kick connected and sent her stumbling. He pushed off the ground and sent a high kick, knocking her ear partially ringing. She blocked his next attack and punched him in the chest, but the attack only bounced off of his golden armor and ended up hurting her instead. She resorted to an underhand tactic taught by her uncle. She brought her head back and grabbed Naruto's arms and rammed her head into his own head, and sent him flying into the ground. But before he could hit the ground, he wrapped his legs around her waist and twisted his body slightly, sending her over to the ground with him. They were entangled with each other in a tight submissive fight. Naruto had one of her arms in a deadlock with Kurotsuchi cutting off circulation to one of his legs. A clone popped into existence a few feet away from the two and charged to help Naruto, while a clone jumped from Kuro's body and ran to help her. But before the clones could do what they were told to do, they attacked each other instead and started engaging in a really amazing fight of taijutsu, with neither clone winning. Bunshin Daibakua. Naruto shouted. Baku Bunshin no Jutsu. Kurotsuchi called. The two clones exploded in a massive blast, entangling the two shinobi from one another, sending them both into trees. Naruto was the first to recover since his armor can take any form of physical damage, be it chakra or weapon-based. He dusted off his shoulders and charged through the smoke only to get a punch to the face. Come on. Is that it? Just before Kurotsuchi could hit him, her temporal lobe got bashed by Naruto's right elbow, sending her stumbling with a slight headache. Naruto turned and saw her faint shadow and started sending the punches to her body. One punch hit her cheek, cracking her jaw slightly. Naruto then sent a leg sweep and floored her into the grass. She rolled away though, right before the Kogen could connect his axe kick. She pushed herself off the grassy clearing and sent a power punch to Naruto and dented his armor, to both of their surprise. Naruto sent a quick drop kick to Kurotsuchi, but she evaded and grabbed his leg instead and hurled him out of the smoke cloud and into the open. Once the smoke cleared, it came to reveal two more masked shinobi. One had a Chikudo katana with lightning pulsating off the blade, while the other had long blonde hair with a blade made pure water. Kurotsuchi smirked slightly before sheathing her kunai. She gave the two newcomers a small smirk and shrugged. It was fun fighting you, Kogen no Oji. Kurotsuchi smiled sweetly. I hope we meet again. Next time, I won't hold back. Naruto replied with the same tone. Yane, Kakoi. Kurotsuchi vanished in a puff of smoke, leaving a snickering Sasuke, a dumbfounded Naruto and a seething Ino. Suddenly Kaide entered the battlefield with a confused look on her face. She walked up to her twin and sheathed her katana. Han just ran off, I was just about to beat him too. Kaide whined. So, how was your fight, Nisan? I'll tell you back home. Naruto laughed. I just hope that the Hiraishin seal really doesn't disappear, I just have to see her again. In a faraway distance in the trees. Dear Yamauchi Kurotsuchi, I wrote this during our fight. I needed you to know something. I had fun fighting you, and I know that you did too, but you and I know that we won't be able to go all out if our forces were nearby, that's why I want to fight you again. No killing, no death, just me versus you, with all of our powers at our disposal. What'd you say? Meet back at the place we fought today at midnight. No later and no sooner. From Namikaze Naruto, Kogen no Oji. Kurotsuchi crumpled the letter and set it on fire using just her chakra within her balled-up fist. Her eyebrows furrowed. The prince wants a rematch, then I'll give him a rematch. Later on that night, indeed at the stroke of midnight, a bright golden flash appeared and Naruto stood in its place. He stared at the cloud of white smoke as Kurotsuchi's body began to show itself through the smoke. She popped her neck and glared at the Konoha shinobi. She started jumping on the heels of her feet as the tension built up between the two of them. Naruto smirked as 9 bright red tails shot from behind him and started spiraling in a way to signify that he feels threatened. He threw a 3-pronged kunai at the girl and vanished, only to reappear right behind her and send a kick to her back. She used a kawarimi just before his attack hit. He landed on the ground and formed a cage bunshin to take the hit for him, as Kurotsuchi rose from the ground with her hands out ready to grab his legs and pull him in for the earth suicide technique that Kakashi used on him a great many a time. With the shadow clone grabbed instead, Naruto was able to jump back and force a Rasengan into the ground. And like a popped blackhead, she shot from the ground, leaving her wide and open. Naruto dashed ahead and punched her abdomen and sent her into another clone, but she quickly turned and sent her foot into the clone's face. Once the clone was sent back, she spun around and sped through hand seals. Uden. Udangan no Jutsu. She shot off 20 bullets from her mouth, each one hitting a clone or nearly hitting the original Naruto. She jumped to the side when Naruto finished his hand seal pattern. Fuden. Daitapa. He took a deep breath and shot off a massive gust of air towards the girl, but she got smart and sped through her own hand seals. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. She sent the fireball towards the wind user, but he channeled lightning chakra all over his body, and used the electrical volts to cut through the incoming blaze, but he managed to make it out of the attack radius. Uden. Yugen Numa no Jutsu. Kurotsuchi clapped her hands together into the snake hand seal. I've got you in my trap now. The blonde began to sink into the lava, inch by inch. Kurotsuchi, though, felt a small pang on her heart as she looked at the talented prince give her small nod. Again, it'll take more than that to beat me. Naruto's voice sounded from behind. Kurotsuchi jumped in surprise and drew out her katana and clashed the blade with his own. She raised her blade and brought it down for a quick attack at his weaker side, but he was able to clash his blade with hers and parry the attack, leaving Kurotsuchi open in the front. She let Naruto stab forward, but once he did, she dodged the attack and grabbed the blade of his katana and used all of her strength to grab a hold of the weapon and fling it from his hands. Naruto backed away and sped through hand signs. Kurotsuchi saw this and backed away a few feet, not noticing the 3-cage bunshin making their way around her flanks. Once she finished her seals, She brought her hand to her lips. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. Kurotsuchi shouted out. Suiden. Dai Mizu Bakufu. Naruto shouted just as Kurotsuchi finished her call. The two attacks collided and caused a massive explosion of steam to cover up the entire battlefield. Kurotsuchi smirked and sped through a different set of hand seals. Since her elder brother was known as the Steam Prince, he taught the young princess a few steam techniques. Joden. Just before she can finish her jutsu, two clones burst through the steam and one punched her cheek, while another sent a swipe kick, completely throwing her off her game. But she couldn't get herself into position again. Once the clones dispersed after hitting the young girl, another clone charged from behind with golden light flowing off of his super fast moving body, and rammed a low-powered Rasengan into her back, firing her off towards the real Naruto, whom of which, was just waiting with his arm outstretched. She racketeered into his arm, and hit him with a powerful strike, nearly sending Naruto down with her. But Naruto channeled chakra into his arm to keep it steady, and managed to simply knock her out. With a small laugh, he laid her down on the grass and placed a Hiraishin seal somewhere she would never see or feel, and put another seal to hide it from view. Just before leaving, he filled out a scroll with a letter and placed it next to the young Iwa girl and flashed away before anyone could notice anything. Backwards time skip end. 4 years later in the present day. The sound of chirping birds shook Naruto from his thoughts. He looked to the sky and found that the morning was coming. He sat up and woke Kurotsuchi from her sleep with a quiet whisper and told her to get dressed. After a few minutes of dressing and a few more kissing, Kurotsuchi stopped and gave Naruto a small smile before popping into a puff of smoke, leaving the golden-haired boy alone in the same clearing that they first met and fought in. He stretched as he fixed his armor and strapped his sword to his side. With a flash of golden light, he was gone. In Konoha, Naruto flashed into his room and quickly changed back into his normal sleeping clothing and headed to his bathroom to take a quick piss before heading back to bed. Once there, he climbed into the sheets and was immediately embraced in the cold arms of his companion. Yamanaka Ino. A small wedding band was around her left ring finger. Where have you been? Ino asked in a soft and groggy voice. I've been quite lonely. I was just going out for a walk, Naruto replied as he kissed the young blonde on the forehead. The sun was brighter than what it normally was. The 20 years old, Naruto squinted for a good portion of the day so far and it was already midday. He was wearing his golden armor, like he usually did with the Konoha Hitai tied around his forehead. Today was just a boring day, especially since there were no missions or anything of that sort, but he had still kept a broad smile stretched on his face since he was with the girl he was married to. Yamanaka Ino. Ino had an ethereal glow about her that made Naruto blush. His heart beat heavy by just with her. It was a feeling that he thought he'd forgotten he had for the platinum blonde. In her left arm were a handful of bags and in her right arm was Naruto's left arm, interlaced with hers. Everyone bowed and gasped at the couple as they made their way through the street. She would stop and converse with the villagers and even played with some of the children who came up to the couple. She sighed and would playfully poke Naruto on his cheeks while still not noticing his frown. The two were walking a calm pace through the village and bought things here and there, wasting his infinite money on useless things for a woman, but Naruto didn't protest. Even though he was enjoying his time spent with his wife, his mind wasn't there or anywhere for that matter. The only thing going on through his mind was the beautiful, curvaceous and sadistic Iowa princess, that he hasn't seen for almost 6 months. It was almost as if she had disappeared. Despite the new and emerging feelings about his actual wife, all of the secret nights together with the princess began to flash into his mind as he concentrated harder to those good days of the past. Flashback. 4 years ago, midnight. I see you came. Kurotsuchi's voice sounded behind Naruto's ear. I was wondering if you got the call. I did. Now I'm here. Naruto turned around and narrowed his eyes at the beautiful princess. What did you want to speak to me about? What? Kuro feigned a look of hurt. I can't talk to the only shinobi who can keep up to me, whenever I want. Well, it's not that, it's just, I was taking a nap. Naruto grumbled. I need to take my naps, you know. Ever since their little introductory scuffle with each other, Naruto and Kurotsuchi met up every few nights for the past 3 months to fight and spar with one another, and on some nights to just talk. Seeing as how no one would listen to their problems or at least understand where they were coming from. Naruto couldn't tell Ino about his issues since he knew that she wouldn't understand. He knew his own sister wouldn't understand. He was so glad that he left a scroll telling her about the Hiraishin seal he placed on her. When Kurotsuchi woke up the next day of that night, she was surprised to see a small scroll placed next to her body. When she opened the scroll, she was pissed off to say the least. She took the long way home to think about the power that the Kogen had given her. The ability to call him to her whenever she wanted. She could always call him in the middle of the street in Iwa and have him captured right on the spot, and sell him for ransom to Konoha. But he trusted her enough to know that she really wouldn't do that. After a long conversation with herself, Kurotsuchi chose to take responsibility of her new power, which surprised herself and Naruto. And it also turned out that Naruto would be able to cross an entire country in less than a second and be able to get to her in a moment's notice. At the beginning of their relationship, if you could call it that, all they did was talk, with their fists. And neither said anything about doing other than that. They liked their fights. For hours the two would go at it every other night it would seem, and sometimes, every night for a week. Throughout the fighting and sparring, the two ended up gaining some form of friendship, or endearment towards one another, especially if they met each other on the unofficial battlefields as masked shinobi. The excitement that flowed through their veins, when they'd see each other flash or pop onto the battlefield, was something that they loved to experience. They've been seeing each other so much, that they were able to recognize each other's chakra signature, so when they were in battle, both sides knew when to show up. Kuro loved their spars. She loved them so much that could easily say that she loves the Golden Prince himself for existing. Naruto, though, was the only person, besides her father and 2 brothers, that could keep up with her and her amazing skills in combat. The Kogen moved with a lightning grace that never ceased to amaze her. It made her tremble with his sheer skill in battle, and recently, it started making her wet. Shaking herself from her reverie, she realized what the golden-haired shinobi prince had just said. You take naps at this time of the night? Kuro deadpanned. You Konoha nin are just so strange. Well, Ino-chan is gone on a mission right now, and won't be back for the next few days, so, Naruto replied with an equally deadpanned expression. I'd only be awake if she were there to tell me what to do. I see that you're still a minion. Kurotsuchi giggled. Yeah. Now, why am I here? Naruto asked with a small smile. Oh, I wanted to talk to you about something. Kurotsuchi suddenly looked so weak to Naruto. What's wrong? The golden-haired boy asked. I'm getting forced into marriage, Kurotsuchi spat. To some snobby-looking noble from one of the other villages of Iwa. I know nothing of him, or his skills, or his damn clan, except for the fact that his grandfather helped my great-grandfather Yamauchi Kyojin, the Shadaime Tsuchikage, fight the Shadaime Hokage and Uchiha Madara. What's this guy's name? Naruto asked, intrigued. Anyone who was a descendant of such people who could fight against such legendary Konoha ninja, then this guy must be something, at least that's what Naruto hoped. Kamizuru Jibaki. Kuro replied. He's quite tall, scrawny-ish, long blonde hair, wears glasses. Wait, Isn't he like 20 years older than you? Naruto growled. That's the thing about people of royalty, Kuro growled. We can't marry for love, but only for the good of the village. Yeah. So, Naruto drew out his katana. You wanna spar? He knew that this was the only way to keep away whatever depressing feelings that they may have residing within them. I was afraid that you wouldn't ask. Kuro had a small smirk curl on her lips. Her heart beat heavily, but she put those feelings aside and narrowed her eyes at the shinobi. The two charged each other with all of their strength and their katanas held steady. But before they could clash their blades against each other, he was snapped from his thoughts and came to realize that he was staring out into space with Sasuke and Kaide looking at him with a worried expression. Ino looked at him with weird eyes as well as she waved her hand in front of his eyes. What is it? Naruto asked with a nervous laugh. Did something happen? Ino giggled slightly. It was like music to his ears, the song that angels sing. Naruto blushed faintly enough so that no one could tell, but Ino's face suddenly flashed and Naruto ended up seeing the transparent face of Kurotsuchi forming around Ino's own face. Naruto shut his eyes and opened them again to see Ino back to normal. Of course. Ino smiled. Check it out. The new Fuenheim movie just came out. She grabbed the golden-haired boy's arm and dragged him towards the movie theater with Sasuke and Kaide trailing right behind. Throughout the entire situation, it happened to bring up another memory. One that had an awkward conclusion. Flashback. 2 years ago, midday. Hello. Naruto flashed into the battlefield with his katana drawn and found Taki Shinobi shooting off water blasts and water dragons against Iwa's fire blasts and earth dragons. The entire battleground was scorched and ruined, with large boulders protruding from the ground, and tons of overturned earth piled high like man-made hills. Fires were raging throughout the clearing for as far as Naruto could see. He dashed through a falling boulder and weaved in between a spiraling water dragon and sped through hand seals once a glob of lava flew over him. Suiten. Sujinheki. Naruto shot out a large blast of water, hardening and cooling the terrifyingly hot liquid. Once the rocks were formed, he used his katana to cut through the hardened lava and dashed through the rocks and landed onto the ground, surrounded by Iwa shinobi and footmen. A footman chose to slash for the golden-armored masked man, but Naruto quickly spun around with his katana held out and slashed the man's throat open. Once he was finished, Naruto kicked the dead man away and dodged a flying kunai and sent his own at the shinobi who threw it at him. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki jumped up and sped through hand seals to evade a flurry of shuriken and kunai flying at him from all directions. Kaden. Goka Mekyaku. The boy spun around while still midair, surprising everyone with the power of his attack, especially Kurotsuchi. The extremely powerful flames scorched through her men and melted their skin. The heat was so powerful that the forest started catching on fire, even though they weren't even hit by the flames. Once Naruto landed into the eye of the inferno, he sped through even more hand seals. Futen. Kami Maikai. A massive gust of wind started to build up around Naruto but then soon enough, formed into a massive tornado that began to expand and blow back all the flames and clear the battlefield of any and all forms of fire and combatant, save for one girl with short black hair and dull pinkish eyes. Wow. That's an interesting attack that you got going on, Naru-kun. Kurotsuchi drawled out the honorific. Caught me off guard with your affinity for fire. Well, I am known as the #1, unpredictable shinobi of Konoha. Naruto smirked as he drew out his katana. Shut up. No you're not. Kuro deadpanned. I called you here because I wanted a challenge. Fighting these minions are pointless. You asked for it then. Don't say I didn't warn you. Naruto smirked. What war? Kuro was punched on her cheek by a shadow clone, and sent flying to her side, but before she could hit the ground, another blasted shadow clone came out and punched her other cheek and sent her flying in the opposite direction like a ping-pong ball. It wasn't even a second into the fight and she was already getting embarrassed. Just as she took notice of the incoming shadow clone, she drew out her lucky tanto and dug the knife into the clone's chest, dispelling it in the process and giving her enough room to maneuver around and get ready to fight her opponent head-on. She grabbed a handful of kunai and hurled them at Naruto, whom of which, promptly dodged. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. Kurotsuchi shot off the childish jutsu and got the planned results. Just as the flames hit Naruto, he flashed behind her and held his kunai ready to stab her. It seems you've already. Wait, what? Kurotsuchi began to melt, revealing another Kurotsuchi smiling right at him with a giant smile. Bakuten. Baku Jisatsu. The smiling Kurotsuchi exploded in a bright red and white light, and sent the armored Namikaze flying into the trees. Once he was finished, plowing through the forest, he landed in a group of recuperating Iowa shinobi and footmen. Get him, one of them shouted. Shit, I don't have my sword. Naruto cursed mentally. One of the shinobi got close enough to start slicing at the masked shinobi, but Naruto weaved and dodged each attack. Still, these shinobi had no idea who he was, except for Kurotsuchi and Han. Speaking of Han, where the hell is the guy? The Iowa shinobi made a grave mistake and missed his slash, giving Naruto the perfect opening. Naruto reached into his kunai pouch and drew out a three-pronged kunai and stabbed it through the shinobi and channeled chakra through the blade, elongating it into a 3-foot-long blade made of pure chakra. Once he tore the attack from the man's body, he threw the kunai at another shinobi. He sighed when the rest of the Iowa force retreated through the forest. Boom! Single quote exclamation mark. I forgot that Kuro was still here. The golden-haired boy dashed through the woods and into the clearing once again and then came to realize just how much carnage he had caused for the Iowa forces. Scorched bodies and some still burning clothes and scorched earth. He looked through to the other side of the clearing and saw smoke billowing into the sky. He concentrated chakra to his ears and the sound of screams became known. He was suddenly stopped mid-step. There was a great and powerful pull on his armor. It surprised and freaked him out at the same time. He looked forward to see Kurotsuchi holding her hand out with a strange aura flowing around it. Turns out I have another Kekkei Genkai. Jiden. Kuro shouted as she pulled the Namikaze towards her with an invisible force of power. Kuro didn't take into consideration the rate at which he was coming in at and the size of the target coming towards her, nor did she take into consideration her own height. She just pulled the Namikaze closer towards her. In a sudden action, the two clashed. But not with their bodies, or swords. Not with their fists or kicks, but instead with their lips. Naruto-kun, Ino-kun. You've been staring out into space lately. You know I could always have my father clear up your mind. In a moment of silence, Naruto stared deep into her teal orbs and for a moment, felt like he was floating in the sea. Her eyes held so much depth that he was literally about to lay down and bathe himself in peace and serenity. But then he just realized what she just said. No need for that, Ino-chan. Naruto coughed slightly. Are we waiting in line for tickets? No. If you weren't staring out into space, you would have noticed Kaide stealing your wallet to pay for our tickets and administration. She even used extra money for food. Ino laughed at Naruto's deadpanned expression. Her smile made Naruto blush. Those white teeth and beautiful smile stretched across her face, only served to accentuate her beauty to its highest form. Thank God his Kage Bunshin were on their way getting the surprise ready. He wanted to impress his wife today. It's alright. At least we get to see the most beautiful actress in history perform in the most famous movie series in history. Ino smirked. Ika Ika Paradise. The movie series. Naruto smiled brightly with a faraway look on his face. Sparkles and glitter glowed and glinted in his eyes as every other man in the movie theater ended up with the same expression as Naruto, just at the mere mention of the name. Baka. Ino lodged her fist into the back of his head and sent him crashing onto the floor of the movie theater, catching the attention of most of the village couples and families. Most of them laughed along with the Yamanaka princess, while others shook their heads at the immaturity of their prince. That was fun, Ino smiled. I'm so glad that his father isn't sending him off on those missions anymore, now we can spend time together. Ino bent down at the writhing Naruto and giggled before helping him up to his feet. That was uncalled for, Naruto whined. Whatever Naru-kun. Just come on. We have a movie to catch. 2 hours and a half later. Naruto stretched and yawned. The movie was amazing, but since he didn't have any sleep the night before, he ended up falling asleep in the movie theater while the movie played. It was a strange thing to prospect in his half-asleep mind, as his dream began to change and morph into something different and into a closer-to-home adaptation with a cast of people based on his life. He sighed when he realized that he couldn't keep up his relationship with Kurotsuchi. It's been 6 months since they last spoke or fought, and Naruto in turn used that time to spend with his wife and twin. It's been a long time since he and his wife got to hang out and actually be a couple, but now that they are, his life has never been better. He didn't have to hide from people or have to meet in secret. He could show his love for her and no one would care. But still, he couldn't fathom how confused he was as the dream played out. It seemed more like a premonition than anything really. It was too vivid to be called a dream, but too out there to be called a reality. He couldn't understand. But at least it was over. He could go on a date with his wife of 2 years and his 2 other favorite people in the world, Sasuke and his twin sister, Kaede. So where are we going off to tonight? Sasuke asked. Somewhere special. Naruto smiled. How so exactly? Ino asked. It's just something that Naruto ni and I put together for all 4 of us. Kaede smirked. So sit tight and be patient. In Iwagakure. Why don't you ever moan when we Kuro-chan? A miserly man sounded from behind the black-haired girl. He wrapped his arms around Body and grabbed one of hers, but she promptly slapped it away. It makes me feel like you're being rebellious. Jabaki took a sip from the bottle of sake in his other hand as he tightened his grip around her right. Kuro grunted and gripped the dresser as tightly as possible. She gritted her teeth when he started rubbing his hand around her. Wait. I thought this stuff turns you on. Well, you thought wrong. Kuro spat. Only works when Naru-kun does it. I'm your husband though, Jabaki whispered into her ear. He quickly grabbed her by the waist and threw her into the bed behind him and immediately got to work. Kuro, though, was kicking and screaming obscenities, but to no avail. What did she expect would happen? This is all she's done for the past 6 months. Her husband thought he was going to get some tonight. Kurotsuchi spat on his face and slapped him off of her body. A small trail of blood trickled out of his mouth and dribbled down the side of his lips. He took off his glasses and put them on the bedside table. Kuro had a wry look on her face as Jabaki quickly got up from his position on the floor. He backhanded Kurotsuchi across the face and pulled up a stool and sat down while putting his hand under her chin and forcing her to look at him. Kurotsuchi growled slightly but deigned from fighting him. For 6 months, she was treated like a prisoner, and that meant that she couldn't see Naruto. For 6 damn months she couldn't see him, hear of him, or just feel him. Jabaki sighed and threw her back into the bed. He scratched the back of his neck and put his glasses back onto his face and left the bed. He walked up to the bar in his room and drew out a bottle of super rare platinum tequila and poured out enough to just fill up a shot glass before downing the entire thing and hurling the glass towards Kurotsuchi. Good thing he was drunk, or else that shot glass would have cut her cheeks open. Now I wonder how your father would feel about this, how should I put it, unresponsive behavior. Jabaki asked as he poured himself another shot. My father wouldn't like this at all, and would feel betrayed and break off our deal with Kitsuchi-sama. I wonder what your father would. I get it. Kuro growled. Now then, would you mind showing me those wonderful tits you have? She sighed. For the past 6 months, this is what she had to deal with. She just prayed to Kami that Naruto would be able to find happiness unlike her lonesome self. She shrugged herself back to normal and stood up while reaching for her shirt. She bit her lip feeling like she's betraying Naruto, but complied anyway. The village comes before personal gain. She lifted her shirt high enough to reveal her plump S and let them plop free of her shirt and glared at Jabaki while he stared intently. He walked towards her with a slow pace and wrapped his effeminate hands over her mounds and started licking the nub. He rubbed his thumb around the areola and pinched her nipple, slightly pissing Kurotsuchi off. For the longest time, it was only Naruto-kun that could touch me like this. Kurotsuchi bit her lip as she tried to fight back the tears. She fought the urge to slap Jabaki and call on Naruto, but why would she do that after so many months of not talking or even the I just want to talk call, but that was beside the point. This is what was important for the Yamauchi clan. Suddenly a team of Junin burst into the room followed by Kitsuchi himself. Kurotsuchi pushed Jabaki off of her and dropped her shirt and bowed to her father. All them shinobi had serious expressions on their faces. They were fully dressed with armor and weapons at their sides. There were Iwa Anbu standing guard outside of the window and outside of the building. We need you for something, Kurotsuchi, Kitsuchi said with narrowed eyes. It seems that your brothers have told me some very compromising information about you and a certain Kogen Oji no Konoha. Kurotsuchi was about to say something in her defense, but Kitsuchi raised his hand and shut off any form of protest from his daughter. We know that you've been seeing the Golden Prince, Kurotsuchi. It was confirmed by multiple sources. Kitsuchi said with an unreadable face. Suddenly a strange feeling washed over Kurotsuchi, starting from the base of her neck into the rest of her body. What information were you able to get out of him while you two fight during the nights? Phew. Holy Kami. I thought I was a goner there for a moment. Kuro steeled her resolve and looked at her father straight in the eyes. Not that much. Just his personal life and a few things about his friends. Oh, from what I can remember, his best friend's birthday is coming up soon. Really? Kitsuchi asked as he rubbed his chin. Which friend? The feeling began to drown her brain and made her feel hazy and like she was floating. Uchiha Sasuke. She replied. She wasn't even able to shut her mouth. He's turning 21 in 2 months on the 23rd of July. The entire Uchiha clan will be face shit drunk during all of this. Entire Uchiha clan? Kitsuchi asked, trying to goad more information from her. Yes. The entire clan. Like everyone. Kuro said. What the? What just happened? Understood. Get more information from him. We'll need to come up with a plan to start off our war with a bang. Kurotsuchi looked down at the floor while all the shinobi left the vicinity and left Jabaki to continue what he was doing. He suddenly tackled Kurotsuchi and started working on her pants. She stared aimlessly at the ceiling of their room and sighed once again before looking away from Jabaki. I need to speak to Naruto-kun, Kami, I just miss him so much. In Konoha, Naruto smiled as Ino gasped at the sight. Sasuke looked at Kaide with a small blush on his cheeks. Faggot. But putting that aside, the four sat on a large blanket with a basket filled with different bento boxes filled with all kinds of wonderful ingredients. Ino smiled brightly as she took the first bite into her bento. Almost immediately, her mouth exploded with a billion different flavors fighting for dominance. It was an exhilarating experience for her. She always loved the Namikaze twins' cooking. Sasuke sighed as he drank a full bottle of sake dry. He smiled at Kaide and kissed her cheeks while getting some rice that was stuck on his lips to get stuck on her cheeks. He looked down and grabbed one of the bento and popped open the top to see his bento shaped and molded and formed into a Sharingan eye, with 4 Uchiha fans on its top and bottom and both sides. He looked over to Kaide and smiled brightly. "Thank you, babe." Sasuke smirked. "Shut up, Sasuke, and get a room," Naruto called out in between the kisses he was giving and receiving from Ino. They sat in relative silence after the makeout sessions ended, and ate their food peacefully. The sun was slowly setting in the distance, bathing Konoha in a grand orange-red hue that seemed to calm the 420-year-olds. Naruto's fingers were tightly laced with Ino's. A small smile was spread across his face as he stared off into the villages and watched the people go about their normal business, and came to realize something: he needed to speak to Kurotsuchi about their relationship, and what they should do. He realized that he couldn't hurt Ino any longer and that he needed to be there for her, especially if what she had told him was true. Naruto sighed at how troublesome the situation could get, but deigned from saying it out loud. He just needed more time to think about certain things. Not only did he have an ongoing affair with his arch-nemesis, but he also had 2 little siblings to start taking care of. Flashback. 3 years ago. Naruto and Kaide came dashing into the hospital room drenched in sweat from their training just a few moments ago. They barged into the hospital room and found their gorgeous mother holding another set of twins in her arms. Their father looked at the 2 new children with a deep happiness rippling in his eyes. Kaide was the first to dash for the children and realized that the new twins were an exact opposite of her and Naruto. The girl, Mito, had blonde hair like her father and had the pale white skin of her mother. The boy had blood-red streaks of hair that flowed through his black hair. At first Kushina was confused, but after a very long explanation from Tsunade about recessive and dominant genes in a person's DNA, Kushina ended up not understanding what the old lady had said. There is a possibility that the child could have a different hair color or mutation in her genes, despite being the child of 2 parents with recessive of dominant genes. Tsunade sighed. "Oh, I think I get it, sort of." Kushina still looked confused, but shook it off to coo at her 2 new babies. It must be strange to see a woman with 17-year-old children having another child, twins no less, but she was only 16 when she gave birth to Naruto and Kaide, so it was understandable. Different times, so things were done differently. "Look at them, they're so adorable," Kaide called over to her elder brother. "They're going to be super strong like us." "Indeed. That's because you 2 not only will be training, you 2 will also be their caretakers when your mother and I are away from the village." End flashback. Yup. That's the life. Naruto sighed. "But how will Kurotsuchi take the news of my new decision?" Naruto shook the thoughts from his head and turned to see Ino with a lustful look on her face. She pulled his shirt collar and began to lead him from the Hokage monument and into the seclusion of the bushes and overgrown brush and foliage at the top of the mountain face. "You know, it's been a while since we ed," Ino smirked as she unclipped her dress. "I'm, also, thinking of a child, Naruto-kun. We're shinobi, you know, so we'll never know when we might die." "Shish." Naruto silenced her with a finger on her lips. "Don't say another word, Ino-chan." She smiled brightly as the golden-haired boy pulled down her pants to reveal soaked panties. The boy slowly pulled those down and kept his eyes on the trail of juice formed from the panty all the way to her entrance. Ino moaned and blushed heavily. Naruto picked her up and began to eat her out with his near-perfect eating skills. He's had tons of practice with Kurotsuchi, not that he'll ever say that out loud. Ino moaned loudly as Naruto began to lick the sensitive nub just above the entrance to her nether lips. Her face was glowing crimson just like the sky above them. No foreplay. Let's skip to the main. Ino was suddenly pushed to the ground with her pointing up and her showing for Naruto in all of its wonderful and shaved glory, dripping in juice. Naruto's member suddenly shot up as Naruto held it against the tight opening. Way ahead, Naruto grunted as he shoved the entire thing into her. Of you, Inoheim. In Iwagakure, Kurotsuchi sat on the shower floor as water pulsated over her form. She felt like shit. Hell, she even looked the part. She sat down on the floor wringing out Jibaki's seed from her. She really didn't want his kid. The only person's child that she could easily say without a doubt was Naruto's. He was strong, a wonderful lover that kept her going for hours, and the best feature of Naruto was that he could keep up with her during their fights, and she dare say, beat her on a few occasions. She just wanted to be in his embrace again. And after that strange feeling she felt when her father showed up, she still didn't know where it came from, but whatever it was, it caused her to spill secret information that could possibly hurt or get Naruto killed, which was something that she really didn't want to happen. She leaned back to let the cold water wash over her sore muscles and drench her obsidian black hair. She took a deep breath and sighed. She clenched her teeth as tears began to fall from her eyes. She hated this. She hated how quickly she was degraded to nothing but some snob's toy. He's even older than her father. Kuro wept, but the shower drowned out her cries. I really need to see him again, I just need to see him. In Taki no Kuni, the light of the moon was up, glowing the night sky in its bright luminescent white light. Kurotsuchi popped into the clearing that everything first began. She sighed at the memories and felt the cooled magma constructs littering the entire battlefield, and the large holes and compact dents in the earth brought a small smile to her face. She calmly walked over to a patch of grass that happened to have a blanket on top with indentions and stab marks showing that something heavy was placed there and swords or something with a sharp tip was stabbed into the ground. The blanket looked ruffled and had dry cum stains. It's still here, after all of those months. Kuro smiled slightly as she replayed the entire night in her mind. All the screams, the cries of pleasure and the clapping of skin in between the two of them. The emotions were overloading her mind as she collapsed onto the grass and felt the puncture marks in the ground. She drew out her katana and stabbed the blade into the ground and laid down onto the blanket laid out on the ground. She could feel him entering her body with such speed and animalistic instinct. His feral look when he'd start pumping chakra into each pump. She could feel her get wet and feel warm as the thoughts continued to linger. The overbearing scent of cum and sweat entered her nose and caused her to nearly lose it. I need to speak to him. She sat up and channeled chakra to the back of her neck once again, and within a moment, unlike the previous results, a bright yellow flash happened not too far from where she was, and from the flash came Naruto dressed in his golden armor. He had a serious expression, but he looked like he was about to cry. What is it, Kuro-chan? Naruto asked. Kurotsuchi was surprised to say the least but didn't show it. I need to talk to you. I missed you for these past few months. Kuro looked away. She sniffled as the thoughts of Jibaki came flowing into her mind, and about how abusive he is. What's wrong? Naruto asked as he pulled her in for a hug. My life is what happened. I'm married to a pedophile rapist that only seems to care about my body. Someone is watching me and somehow found out about me sneaking out and meeting you and told my father about it. What? Naruto's eyes went wide. What has your father said about it? Just that he wants to start our war with a bang, she replied. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun, but my nation comes before our love. Alright, tell me anything of importance if you can, please. I don't want us to be forced to kill each other. Naruto quietly pleaded. Understood, but hey, we'll have to be more careful when we meet, Kuro said sadly. We'll have to cut down on our meetings. I agree, Naruto replied. The speed of his response made her heart pang with hurt. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly. I have a wife whom of which that I'm starting to fall for, and I'm pretty sure that your husband is going to get suspicious. Kuro's lips twitched slightly as she looked away. What is he trying to say? Understand, Naruto said with a commanding tone. No one can ever know about what we've become. If a war breaks out, we'll have to cease all communication with each other. Is he trying to kick me from his life? Kuro's heart began to hurt, but she didn't show it. The two have been having a secret relationship together for the past 3 years, and throughout that relationship, they gave each other everything: food, training, information, stories, and even their virginities. It happened so long ago that they didn't even care to elaborate on how it happened. All that either can remember about that night was that it was one of the best that they've ever felt. Kuro-chan, please understand. Naruto sighed before turning his back to the Iwa Kunoichi. If it's going to have to be this way, then so be it, Kurotsuchi frowned. I guess this is the end of our relationship, isn't it, minion? I guess it is. Naruto frowned, but vanished away in a flash of light before they could elaborate on their issues. For a few moments Kurotsuchi stayed silent. Everything just hit her like a ton of bricks. For 6 months, she fought back and rebelled against Jibaki and her marriage because of her love for Naruto, but only to find out that he moved on. She wasn't mad, nor was she sad, she was just confused for the moment. After all that she went through, all of the risk she went through to see him, he just blew her off like that. She did the only thing she thought of doing. She suddenly collapsed onto the ground and broke down into tears. She didn't expect it to be this way, but if Naruto was going to be this way, then so be it. She didn't even put up a fight. War it is, Kogen no Oji. Kurotsuchi shut her eyes and looked up to the moon. The Yugenheim will be the one to kill you, since this is the way it has to be. It's nothing personal. She stood up and overloaded the Hiraishin seal on her neck and caused it to destroy itself and vanish, leaving her unmarked. She reached into her kunai pouch and pulled out a 3-prong kunai, personally made by Naruto and gifted to her on her 19th birthday, and threw it into the ground next to her katana. It's just war. The night passed slowly, especially since the Golden Prince was alone for the last few nights. The wife that he just started to truly fall for has been gone on an S-ranked mission. His bed was cold and his blanket was all his. He trailed his thumb over his right finger and traced it across the ring wrapped around the base of his finger. He took a deep breath as the sun's rays began to force their way through his room's windows and drawn shade. Why, son? Naruto groaned. I could have had a nice sleep. He sighed in distress and sat up. His bedhead making it seem like he has more hair than what he actually does. He threw off the blankets and slid off his bed and walked ahead through the large room and headed for his bathroom. He looked at himself in the mirror and quickly looked away. His facial features were deteriorating. Well, that's what he thought. After his shower, he walked around the room with only a towel hiding his lower body. He calmly walked up to his window and pulled open the shades to reveal the sight that he loved to wake up to. The village hidden in the leaves. Birds were flying about through the morning scene of the bustling village. People and tourists were traveling through the streets, staying in the nice hotels that lined the main road of the village, with businessmen and farmers all along the strip selling their wares and goods. Kami, I love this village. He turned around and leaned against the window sill. Still, what is this feeling? It's irking me. In Iwagakure no Sato, traveling through the thick darkness and the even thicker smoke, one could find Kurotsuchi sitting in a chair with a blank look on her face. Her husband was passed out on his bed. Just recently he had finished releasing a thick load into the 20-year-old Kunoichi. She used to fight back and struggle, but after what Naruto had done to her, she shook her head from her thoughts and looked away from her reflection. She looked terrible. Her hair was significantly longer and her eyes held a strange animosity in them, which she just couldn't comprehend. Eye bags were formed beneath her tired dull pink eyes. If this were any time before, she would be crying her eyes out right now, but she was broken. She lost the one person that she could truly say that she loved, to a Yamanaka whore. Kurotsuchi clenched her fists tighter as the thoughts of Naruto came flittering through her mind. Her head was in pain, as was her stomach, but it was fine. She knew she wasn't pregnant. She always made sure not to. But lately, she was getting fed up with her thoughts. She wanted to give in to what her father keeps telling her. She wants a war. Because it's the only way she'll be able to see him. Kurotsuchi threw away the cigarette she was burning through, and leaned back in her seat. Her mind was floating as she stared at the dark ceiling above her. Where she was, she doesn't really know, except that it's where the Kamizuru have their mating parties, or whatever it is. Kuro didn't give a damn. All she cared about was exacting revenge on the one who truly wronged her. Kogen Oji no Konoha, or Namikaze Naruto, the Golden Prince of Konoha. Kurotsuchi scoffed and looked back at her reflection. She's been used and abused by Jabaki, but she never really took into consideration what kind of damage the snob actually did to her body. Her arms and chest have bruises and scars, not from combat or from torture, but instead, they were the normal results of an abusive husband. He's a drunk with a small. Kuro laughed. I can take the pain, I just can't take that pain. Kuro sighed and got up from her seat in front of her dresser. She wafted through the smoke and found her way to the bathroom and quickly funneled inside to make sure that she was alone. She washed her face and washed her chest. She shook her head and walked over to take a nice and warm shower to relieve herself of her issues. In Konohagakure, Naruto stretched his arms slightly before entering the Ichiraku ramen booth. After being greeted by Tyuki and Ayame, he sat down at one of the high stools and ordered 6 miso ramen bowls. Within moments, the first 3 were dropped in front of the prince, and the boy dug in with so much speed that it somewhat scared some of the newcomers to the restaurant. Once Naruto finished his meal, he slapped down enough to pay for his food and their rent for the next month. Once Tyuki realized this, he freaked out and told Naruto that there was no need for that, but the Golden Prince reassured that it was like a present for being such good chefs. He flashed the 2 business owners a small smile and headed out onto the strip. He placed his hands into his pockets. A slightly bummed expression was spread on his face as he looked around at the people of the strip. Once they saw the golden-haired, whisker-faced prince, they dropped down and bowed as deep as they could. Women quivered, men trembled, and children were awe-stricken. The Namikaze Senju paid no attention to it and sighed. It wasn't that he didn't like the attention, it's just that all of the glances of endearment, the praise, it got old after a while, and it only served to show who the most trustworthy of your friends are. Naruto flashed a small grin and walked off to nowhere in particular and looked away with his eyes shut. It was too early to be thinking about all of those depressing things. Maybe some training is in schedule for me, what do you say, Kurama? Naruto asked. I would like some training, Kurama replied with a smirk. We still need to work on that damn Biju cloak of ours. Yes sir. Naruto flashed away from the street and reappeared in the middle of his old training ground. Training Ground 7. The memories of when he was still just a young prince in training flowed into his mind as the breeze flew in, blowing through his unkempt hair and loose kimono sleeves. After relishing in the breeze, he took a deep breath and pulled the reins on his nerves and had a new face filled with determination and resolve. He hunched over with his hands on his knees as he called upon the synchronized chakra of his Biju. The effects were beautiful. His body burst into yellow flames as black seals grew on his skin and spread from the seal on his abs and up to his chest. The seals spread from there, down his arms and stopped at the back of his hands. A haori made from chakra spread off of his body and the seals continued to spread. He was bathed in the greatest golden light anyone has ever seen. Seems fitting since he is the Golden Prince. He smirked to himself and looked around the battlefield and 20 clones formed. Each clone glared at each other and the original. With a quick flare of chakra, the 21 Narutos vanished in a blast of golden light. In Iwagakure, Kurotsuchi narrowed her eyes at her opponents. There were two of them. One was a giant with the same pinkish eyes as she did and the other was much shorter with the same black eyes of her father. The black-haired lava princess stretched and popped her back before continuing the stare down. Her two brothers only received 1 Kekkei Genkei, while she herself received 4. Her giant opponent was her elder brother, the Steam Prince. He was wearing his battle armor with red metal plates forged together, but still gave him mobility. On his back was the furnace he would channel chakra into to force steam from the open ends. He wore a giant hat over his head with the Iwa Hitai metal plate added to his hat. He stood with a Y pose and kept his right hand in his open chest kimono. The smaller opponent was a redhead with a kimono on. He wore the standard wear of an Iwa Junin, so the young boy wasn't so special in the style department. His red hair was held back in a ponytail tied together by a black strap of cloth. Covering his forehead and most of his face was a large helmet like Hitai. He stood with a more reserved and scared defensive stance, unlike his elder brother. Well then, Rushi. Han. Kuro smirked. Come. The two Jinchuriki charged forward with the chakra of their Biju shooting off in waves. Kurotsuchi was in perfect sync with her Biju and 8 wolf tails shot from her back and smacked the two Jinchuriki away from her, causing both of them to crash through trees and get forced through the ground. She looked at her two siblings with an apathetic look. While she herself was degrading into darkness, her Biju was trying her hardest to calm her container down. Kuro, though, paid no heed to the Biju within her. Her eyes were no longer a dull color, but instead, they were exploding with hatred and fire. Her fists began to glow as her body temperature and chakra began to heat up to levels unknown before. Lava soon formed her bones, and then her muscles, and it spread out to form her skin. Her vivid eyes widened out into 2 bright lights on her face as the lava armor continued to take over her body. She growled at her youngest brother since he was the one who stole the technique from her in the first place. She charged forward with a burst of speed and formed a blade of lava that extended from her palm. Just as she closed the distance between herself and her brothers, she held the blade steady, just millimeters from his skin. Han got up and charged her with his special taijutsu with steam building up in the fists and feet. He sent a heavy hook, but Kurotsuchi dodged and sent a side kick, knocking the man back a few feet. She withdrew her blade and dashed with chakra expelling out of her legs. The distance was closed once again. She sent a punch for the giant, but Han blocked the attack. Kurotsuchi expected this and sent another strike to his abdominals with her right foot, but Han let go of her fist and blocked her foot with his arm. Kurotsuchi smirked and brought both of her hands around and smashed them on both sides of Han's face, bursting his eardrums. As he stumbled, Kurotsuchi landed and sent a few well-placed punches and sent off a furry tail to smack him away, leaving her with her lava-release brother. Yuten. Shikugaryugen no Jutsu. Rushi shot off 50 large balls of superheated balls of drying magma towards his sister. As this happened, Rushi himself went into his lava armor technique and charged for his sister. Kuro dodged and weaved in between each attack and even punched a few back towards her brother. The girl wasn't going to have any shit today. She was pissed off at Jabaki, of course, she was pissed off at her father, she was pissed off about her village, and most of all, she was pissed off at the goddamn Kogan no Oji. She shook her head of thoughts about the boy. If she thought of him, she might end up messing up and losing against her little brother, which was something what was never going to happen. Rushi sped forward and sent a heavy haymaker towards her jaw, but she evaded the last second and sent her own hook towards the lava-armored shinobi and hit his weak spot. Just below the lower left ribcage. The attack was strengthened with a large amount of her own and her Biju's chakra. The result was a massive blast that sent the boy flying into the sky with a trail of smoke and strands of chakra flying off of his singed clothing and armor. She hit so hard that his crown-like Hittite snapped off of his forehead and cracked the moment it hit the ground. One more. She growled slightly and turned her attention to her elder brother and found that he was already entering his Biju state. A white tail with a large flame coming off the end was extended from behind. The giant charged forward with the intent to kill his little sister. His fist was drawn back with fire building up in his fist. He punched but Kurotsuchi dodged and sent a kick at her brother and sent him back again. The black-haired girl shook her head at how dull it was to fight him. Suddenly, Han pulled out his trump card and began to go through katas for calming and drawing out his chakra without using hand seals. He shut his eyes for a good 10 seconds before punching at Kurotsuchi, despite being nearly 10 feet from her. What the hell? Kurotsuchi weaved around the large fire dragon that had just launched itself from her brother's fist. She spun around on the ball of her heel and sped through hand seals. That's new. Kokuo must have taught him something new. Han charged ahead once more with fire and steam in each punch and kick. Kuro backed away when Han went for a leg sweep imbued with fire. The girl charged for her brother, but his tail suddenly changed its element and the fire was suddenly extinguished as a funnel of highly volatile wind took its place. In the split-second change, the tail was swung for Kurotsuchi. The power behind the attack sent the girl flying. That's new. Kuro was awestruck. The tail's element changed once more, but the wind dissipated and the tail began to spark. Blue streams of electricity could be seen, moving and flowing through the small strands of fur. It built up so quickly that the tail was suddenly engulfed in a bright blast of lightning. With lightning pulsating off of his tail, he charged forward with lightning aiding him in his attack. He flashed in front of his sister with almost the same speed at her former lover. Han sent a punch when he realized that she was in a state of shock. The attack connected and sent her careening into a boulder protruding from the ground. Her body smashed through the hard stone, shattering it into tiny little pieces. She laid there in silence and stared off into the empty sky of Tsuchi no Kuni. Memories flashed into her mind from that attack by her brother. Naruto. 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 Why did everything have to go back to him? She sat there as tears formed in the corner of her eyes. She laid there in the little pieces of rubble that formed from the collision. Her back was numb and her head was light. Her eyes trailed through her memories and each time she thought of him, those old feelings of guilt washed over her once more. She's betrayed him time and time again. Kuro-chan, are you okay? Han asked with a worried tone. Rushi was there as well with the same worried look. Kuro snapped from her reverie and smiled softly at her siblings. The two reached down and helped her up to her feet. She wrapped her arm around both of their backs as they led her from the training ground. God, I'm so happy I have such caring brothers. I wonder what would happen if I told them about Jabaki and what he really does. July 10th, Tuesday, midday. Han. As my top strategist and my eldest son, I am curious if you have a plan on how to enter the Uchiha compound during the party. Kitsuchi said. The Tsuchikage sat down on his knees on an elevated platform. Below the platform was a large map of Tsuchi no Kuni and Hai no Kuni with their troop placements and fortresses and outposts. There were 200 pieces that represented Aiwa's troops and nearly 1,000 for Konoha. The thing about Aiwa's troops was that nearly half of those pieces were in Hai no Kuni over the border of their nations. With a quick analysis, one would think that Konoha would have better border patrol to watch over their territories. On either side of the map were 3 people. Each person wore Junin vests of Aiwa and wore body armor. The man to Kitsuchi's immediate right was named Kazushi Hora, first commander of Aiwa's 1st Battle Division. To Kazushi's immediate left is his twin brother, Junichi Hora, 1st commander of Aiwa's 2nd Infantry Division. To finish the right side of the meeting was Guro Yasuda, 1st commander of Aiwa's Special Infantry Division. Opposite to Kazushi is Ganshiro Tanji of the Tanji clan and commander of Aiwa's 1st Shinobi Battle Division. Next to Kazushi is Rei Tsuchida, the only female commander present. She is in command of Aiwa's Special Explosive Division. Next to her is Kojiro Teramoto, commander of Aiwa's 2nd Shinobi Battle Division. Up with the royal family, Kitsuchi sat on his high throne. Next to him on his right is Kurotsuchi dressed in her battle armor and traditional Aiwa kimono underneath. On Kitsuchi's left is Rushi. He too was wearing his battle armor. Traditionally, Rushi wouldn't be allowed into the meetings, but since his elder brother was going to be in command of the operation, Rushi would be taking his place as left-hand man of the Tsuchikage. Indeed, I have a plan, father. Han replied. As you know, the 21st birthday of Uchiha Sasuke is coming up. The men and women present nodded their heads in understanding. Han walked onto the map spread out on the floor and pulled out a pointer and looked at the different pieces placed throughout the land of fire and the land of rock. As it stands, that is the only time that both the Senju and Uchiha are weak. Han said. With the information that my little sister was able to obtain from the Golden Prince himself, she was able to determine a way to get in. If you may. Thank you. Kuro stood up and took the point and brought up a map of the Uchiha compound. Currently, we have 300 spies and sleeper agents in or in the vicinity of Konoha and her walls. The intended target of this assault is the destruction of the Uchiha and Senju clan. There was a collection of gasps. Rei and Kazushi were surprised at the princess's audacity, while the others merely shook off the surprise and smiled slightly at the girl of true Aiwa descent. My brother and I will be leading the mission. It is non-negotiable, Kuro said just before her father could protest. It will be a long mission, lasting for a few weeks. Our plan that we devised together is that we will go into the village under the guise of party caterers. What? Ganshiro asked in surprise. Caterers. People who bring in cakes and food. What do you think? Kuro asked. But the food will be poisoned, and the cakes and other party-type things that they might have planned will have weapons hidden in them for when we strike. There was a silence that took the meeting. Kitsuchi looked at her and signaled her to continue. The poison will be slow-acting, first attacking their nerves, and it will cause them to become delirious and spastic. Once everyone is affected, that is when our sleeper agents and spies will break from their disguise and start cutting down the Uchiha. Han and I will handle the head family of the Uchiha. Kuro said. Not only will we be getting help from the agents that we already have in the village and all over Hai no Kuni, but there are also factions within Konoha that want the Senju gone from power. Can we trust these factions? Junichi asked. I do not know. I don't even know who they are, but they promised aid and they were even willing to send some people to help us sell our cover. Kuro said, handing the commanders the scroll. Looks of surprise and a few gasps were even heard. Surprised looks were on many of the commanders' faces. Even Kitsuchi was surprised when he looked at the scroll in his hands. He looked at his daughter with a nervous look and then to his son for a sign of agreement with his little sister. Han merely nodded at his father and motioned for Kuro to continue. Anyway, back to the plan. Kurotsuchi walked back to the map of the Uchiha compound. For this operation, we will need false documentation, false identification, false everything. We will need to sell the cover to the Uchiha or Senju when they come to us for catering. What is the cover for your party catering company? Ray asked. Miki Muranaka Catering Company. Family owned for the last 83 years. Kurotsuchi said. Han's cover will be Heizo Muranaka, the current owner of the business and elder brother of Satomi Muranaka, co-owner of the company. How will we strike? Guro asked. The signal for the attack will be when the shamisen begins to play. Kuro said. Once the song begins, our spies and agents in disguise will burst from the shadows and slaughter as many Uchiha and Senju as we can and as fast as we can. We will need to be fast because once the attack begins, the Hyuga police will be on the scene within an hour. All escape routes have been planned out. Han said, taking over for his younger sister. The attack force will split into 5 different groups. He took his pointer and pointed to the different exits and entrances and rooftops to escape from. One was straight through the highest window of the highest tower in the compound. In the situation that any of us falls behind, we will die before we are taken prisoner. Han said with little emotion or remorse. The casualty rate that is projected for this operation is, at a minimum, 80% casualty rate. There was another collection of gasps, but the others reined their emotions and continued to listen intently to the prince's plan. The operation will begin tomorrow, and the false documents are to be expected to finish by tomorrow as well. Kuro said. We contacted our sleepers and spies and filled them in on the operation. The commanders of each cell in Hai no Kuni agreed with the operation specifics. They are getting false identities for us as we speak. Kitsuchi nodded his head and looked at his war council and looked at his 2 eldest children and scratched his chin before nodding in agreement. Rushi pulled out the official mission scroll and stamped it with the royal seal of the Yamauchi clan, before sending it off to the documentation department of Iowa. Head to Hai no Kuni immediately, you two. Kitsuchi said. In Konoha, 7 p.m. Okay. So here's the game. Naruto listened intently to his 2 favorite comrades. Kotetsu and Izumo. You drink till you drop. Whoever is left standing, wins. I'm game. Naruto smiled with a smirk. So am I. Kaide said with the same smirk. Oh really? Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. Yes really. Kaide replied with a growl. We are the same age, so you can't say shit about me being too young. I never thought of it. Naruto sighed. Bring her in. 3, 2, 1, go. Naruto, Kotetsu and Izumo quickly dived for their sake heavy liquor, while Kaide was drinking hers at a quick pace. She savored the flavor and the slight burn that the alcohol gave her. She looked over to her twin brother and shook her head as he downed his 8th bottle of sake. Kotetsu and Izumo were awestruck at Naruto's drinking ability and immediately called over the rest of Naruto's teammates. At the start of the operation to fight back and stagnate Iowa's advances through Kawa no Kuni and Taki no Kuni, Naruto requested a unit of highly specialized shinobi to be a part of his special unit of shinobi known as the Golden Knights or the Kogen no Kishi. They wore the standard Junin vests of Konoha underneath a plate of gold infused with steel. The members were Namikaze Naruto, Namikaze Kaide, Uchiha Sasuke, Uchiha Itachi, Hitaki Kakashi, Shiranui Genma, Namiyashi Rado, Yamashiro Aoba, Maida Gai, Hagane Kotetsu, and Kamizuki Izumo. Each member by default was taught the Hiraishin to aid Naruto in his battles and to also keep up with the Namikaze, but they weren't as perfect with it as Kaide and Naruto were. They acted like Anbu, protected like Anbu, even wore masks at times, like Anbu, but they fought like vicious animals. Each of their specific skills are powerful and accentuated each other like a well-oiled machine created for the specific job description of destroying their enemies. They were virtually unstoppable, at least, that was until Kurotsuchi came along with the black cloaks, or the Kuroi manto. The Kuroi manto moved swiftly like a disease through the forest with their black shrouds shadowing the land around them. There were at least 30 members in the unit, with the most powerful Iwa shinobi that Iwa has ever produced. All of them were S-class shinobi or higher, with Kurotsuchi being the highest on the list. What better way to stop the darkness than with a flash of light? But back to the game. Naruto had finished his 20th bottle of sake and heavy liquor, and was extremely woozy. He looked over to see Kotetsu and Izumo, completely face-shit drunk and lying face down on the table with a trail of saliva pouring out of their mouths. He looked over and saw Sasuke starting to lose consciousness, with Kakashi faring no better. But what really irked the elder Namikaze was that his sister was sitting there with her 30th bottle of sake, sipping away like some high-class civilian. Need something, brother? Kaide asked as she put down her bottle and picked up another bottle of sake. She popped the cork and began to take small sips and slowly upgrade to larger and large gulps. What Naruto didn't know was that the yin half of Kurama's chakra was slowly upgrading Kaide's chakra reserves. The fox within her was changing the alcohol into energy, thus turning it into chakra, and getting rid of the feeling of being drunk. Nothing, Chieater, Naruto slurred. He picked up another bottle and pulled the cork out with his teeth and spit the cork out towards a buzzed Kakashi, knocking the man over and off of his stool, causing him to smash face down onto the floor beneath them, and nearly flip the entire table over on its side because of his flying legs. The moment Kakashi fell drunk, Sasuke soon followed right afterwards and fell backwards with his eyes rolled to the back of his head. I think you're about to lose Nissan. Kaide giggled. No. Naruto suddenly stopped talking and fell face down onto the table and knocked down his empty bottles, causing them to fall with a domino-like effect in its collapse. Some bottles were knocked off and fell to the floor and shattered into little shards as Naruto slowly slid off the edge and fell to the floor to join his shit-faced teammates. July 21st, Friday, midday. Shit. Makoto cursed. What's wrong? Fugaku asked. The Akamichi caterers won't be able to cater the party. Makoto sighed. They have been hired for a daimyo of a nearby nation. We have no one to cater for the party. Wait. Makoto-san. Yamanaka Inoichi called out from their garden. I think I might know a catering service that can help you. Oh really? Naruto said from behind Makoto. Next to him was Sasuke, Kaide, Mito and Arashi. Who? Miki Muranaka Catering Company. Inoichi said. Ino received a job from them, since she resigned from shinobi life. Oh. That business that she found not too long ago that was looking for employees. Naruto said in agreement. From what she told me, they do everything, from catering food, to flowers, hence Ino, to music and party supplies. Oh Kami. Naruto, you should go there and get them to set up the party. Makoto smiled brightly. Thank you Inoichi-san. I guess we get to visit my wife at her work you guys. Naruto smiled his foxy grin and began to walk off through the compound towards the business building located deep in the business section of Konoha. It was a nice quiet trek towards the business sector of Konoha, despite the different street vendors trying to get the famous Kogen no Oji and the aka harem to buy their wares. Once at the destination though, the five were surprised to see such a simple but beautiful building. It was a traditional pagoda type of structure, but it had a wonderful garden and a fleet of carriages and carts for carrying their supplies. The group entered the store and found a large waiting area within the first few seconds of walking. At the front was a receptionist desk and two large doors that led to the presumed kitchen and assortment rooms for their different parties that they were probably catering for. Ah, Namikaze-sama, a voice said from behind. Kuro-chan. Naruto's eyes bulged slightly, but quickly calmed down when he looked behind to see a girl with the same face as Kurotsuchi but not the same eyes. He eased his tensed-up muscles and bowed to the young woman. The woman had her hair up in a bun with chopsticks going through it, kabuki-styled. She had a small mole underneath her eye and she wore eyeglasses. Her eyes were a bright brown sprinkled with a light red of sorts. As for her attire, she wore a simple business blazer with high heels and a businesswoman's skirt. She looked extremely classy. In her hands was a suitcase. "I am Satomi Muranaka, co-owner of this fine establishment." She bowed. "You honor me with your presence, my lord. Now, what are you here for? Is there a party that needs catering? A wedding you want planned?" "Shit," Kuro screamed. "I didn't expect him to show up so damn fast. Thank Kami that I was able to hide and completely change my chakra signature. He would have seen through the guys so damn fast." "Ah yes. After some last-minute changes of plans and a few difficulties with our original planned caterers, we are left with no one to say no more, Namikaze-sama. I understand completely." Kurotsuchi smiled and led them to a large table and pulled out a binder from her suitcase at her side. She opened the binder and it came to reveal a massive assortment of foods, flowers, streamers, plates, silverware. It was ridiculous at just how customizable everything was. "Now fall for the bait, and choose the ones that are most likely what you would choose for your buddy." Kurotsuchi mentally chanted. "That really huge cake right there," Naruto said with a smirk. He looked over to his best friend with a questioning look. "I'm down with whatever you pick, brother. Just don't choose anything stupid." Sasuke droned with a faint smirk on his lips. "This isn't your party. It's mine." Yeah, Tem. Naruto said with a laugh. "Is it possible to have a taste test of the cake?" "Why, of course, my lord." Kurotsuchi flashed a fake smile. "Just follow me." They walked through the large hallways for a few minutes before getting led into a room filled with different cake variations with different flavor choices and combinations. Just the smell was enough to cause the 4 Namikaze present to drool. "He's still as cute as ever though," Kurotsuchi thought sadly. "That damned Yamanaka harlot got lucky as all, tch. Why do I still love him?" "So, you there?" Naruto asked while waving his hand in front of her face. Kurotsuchi awoke from her thought-induced stupor and looked at Naruto with a confused face. She then realized that her cheeks were burning hot and she was blushing up a storm, even though she tries her hardest not to. She looked with fearful eyes before turning away from Naruto and grabbing a sample of the nearest cake and shoving it into Naruto's mouth in an attempt to play it off. Too close, Kuro thought. Wow. Naruto smiled with his eyes shut tightly. This is really good, huh? Kuro looked behind her and stared at the cake sample she just gave him and held back a giggle. The cake was an experimental cake flavor called Ramen Delight. Oh Naruto, wait, no, I just realized that he'll be at the party. Hey, Sasuke-ni, can I please choose this flavor? Naruto asked with stars in his eyes. The Namikaze siblings then went ahead to try the cake and were immediately put under the same trance that their elder brother was in. Sasuke though growled and shook his head. Do you by any chance have anything tomato flavored? Sasuke asked with a slight tinge to his cheeks. If there was anything that gave him an orgasmic overflow of emotions, it was tomatoes and hentai. Mainly tomatoes though. Why yes I do, Uchiha-sama. Kuro smiled and led them towards a large cake with a sample slice. Sasuke quickly grabbed a sample and scarfed the sample down his throat and made one loud and deep-sounding gulp, that made a few of the people present gag slightly. Now that is delicious, Sasuke said looking at them with a slight chibi look to him. Let's get both. Okay. So when is the party? Kurotsuchi asked with a notepad drawn out and a pen in her hand. Gah, I'm so stupid. Naruto mentally laughed. In 2 days, I'm so sorry that it's on such a short notice. Nah. Don't worry Namikaze-sama, Kurotsuchi again said with her fake smile plastered on her face. We'll get to it immediately. Okay, now that the cake choosing is done, let's choose the actual foot and main course of the party for the people. Kaide laughed. And after that, let's look at flowers and decorations with the help of Ino. July 23rd, Sunday, 8 p.m. With the work on the Uchiha compound coming up nice and smoothly, flowers, decorations and other important party-like things were being moved through the main entrance and a few other side entrances. Some of the employees marked the certain areas and entrances and exits with special chakra residue that only Iowa shinobi could sense. Okay, I want the flowers and such moved over to that side of the courtyard. Ino said as she directed the horde of men and women pushing carts and driving carriages into the courtyard for last-minute decorations. She looked over to her right and flashed a loving smile to Naruto and walked off after giving directions to the rest of the workers. Naruto himself was helping out with shadow clones, as was his twin. As it was, they had already gotten much of the party set up. All they had to do was move the food into place. On the opposite side, the company's birthday band was setting up. The strange thing was that there were more flutes and drums than strings. Actually, there was only one samisen set up on the stage, which was strange, since there's usually 2 or even 3 on stage. But it wasn't enough to be wary about. Suddenly 2 extremely soft arms wrapped around Naruto's waist. Naruto gasped slightly but turned to face his wife and smiled brightly. He planted a small kiss on her forehead and rested his forehead on hers as he wrapped his arms around her waist as she trailed her arms up and around his neck. What they didn't notice was that Satomi Muranaka was watching quite subtly with a hurt expression on her face. She is so dead, Kuro growled as she clenched her fists. Her anger was starting to affect the seal placed on her and it was messing with the power of the genjutsu. Kuro took a quick and deep breath before looking away and continuing with her duties as party planner. She was leading in equipment and the expensive silverware and tables and lights for the party. Doesn't matter, it's coming. It's almost time. Elsewhere in the compound, the Uchiha Itachi, a golden knight, was conversing with his longtime friend Uchiha Shisui. They were speaking about important information and extremely important people. Itachi was disturbed by the information. It turned out that it seemed that the Yugenheim and her brother the Joki Oji had practically disappeared off the face of the elemental nations. Itachi quickly shunshined off to speak to Kakashi. The second in command of the Golden Knights needed to know of the information. He charged through the hallways and found the hall he needed to get to, in the maze of a compound that he lived in. Suddenly, the lights went black and Itachi lost all control of his movements. Once the lights came back on, Itachi locked eyes with a familiar face. His eyebrows twitched when he realized what was happening. So, that's what all of this is? Itachi asked rhetorically, right before everything went black for the Uchiha prodigy child. Midnight. The festivities went according to plan. The entire Uchiha clan was present and the Senju clan was present. At one end of the courtyard sat the royal family sitting side by side with the Uchiha head family. Minato, the current Hokage, sat with Kushina at his side with Mito and Arashi sitting next to her. On Minato's left sat Naruto and next to Naruto sat Ino, since Kaide was dancing with Sasuke in the center of the courtyard. Sasuke was having the time of his life but something was bothering him. Where the hell was his brother? Sasuke felt a small pang of hurt to his heart when his brother didn't show up for the opening of the party, but the Uchiha just sighed and probably thought that Itachi was just going to surprise him again. But at least he was Kaide. The Uchiha could honestly say that he was in love with the Namikaze Senju girl. Her red hair entranced the boy like a sea of roses that flowed in the wind with a calm breeze blowing through the loose petals. The smell of Kaide's hair made the black-haired Uchiha weak in the brain and calmed his senses. He really can say that he loves her. Once the song ended, everyone stood and began to clap for the couple in the center of the dance floor. Everyone thought that the music was over and that it was time for presents and final speeches, but the samisen player stood up and walked off the stage and began to play a melodramatic tune. The guests had confused looks on their faces. Out of the corner of Naruto's eyes, he noticed some of the caterers and employees that they hired tense up. He looked down at his drink and took another sip. Once he looked up, the samisen player was already up to the head family table playing a soft tune, entrancing the Uchiha matriarch, Makoto. It was just then that Naruto realized what was happening. No! The boy screamed, but it was too late. The samisen player flashed a quick half-ram hand seal and the samisen popped into a katana. The fake musician swung the katana and beheaded Makoto in one fell swoop. All around the courtyard, the employees and workers popped into smoke and charged for the buzzed or drunk clansmen of the Uchiha and Senju. Knives, swords and daggers were drawn as the assassins dug their weapons into the off-guard members of the clans. Uchiha were slaughtered left and right as blood was spattered across the party room. Suddenly an assassin came too close to the head table. Kushina was the first to strike, and punched the man so hard that he flew away, dead before he hit the ground. The mother of four straightened up, but suddenly felt lightheaded. Her nerves began to feel strange. She looked to see her children scared for their lives as a group of assassins surrounded her kids. She was too far, but good thing her husband was there. Minato flashed in front of the attackers and stabbed each and every one of them with quick repetition. But even the great yellow flash of Konoha was affected by this strange ailment. He fell over and collapsed onto the floor. Kushina screamed in horror and charged for her fallen husband, but she was stopped by a giant man dressed in heavy armor with a furnace on his back. The most defining feature of his attire was the Iwa Hitai metal plate on his hat. People were screaming and people were howling as the blades were forced into their bodies and slashed about. Men, women and children all faced the same fate, death. And a painful one at that. Kurotsuchi smiled slightly, but felt a small pang of guilt hit her heart. I've listened to Naruto-kun preach about world peace too much. Then her target was seen. The Yamanaka heiress, Yamanaka Ino, was being protected by 3 Naruto clones. The assassins battled it out with the already faltering Namikaze as he was starting to show weak points in his defense. Just as the massacre was reaching its peak, the doors that lead to the main house of the compound burst open to reveal a shirtless Itachi with scars all over his body. His eyes seemed to have been ripped from his head. He stumbled a bit before collapsing to his knees. Itachi was cried out, silencing the massacre. Itachi! Sasuke wailed. So far, the youngest Uchiha was barely able to process what was happening. His entire clan was being slaughtered in just one night. Even the Senju were suffering. But to see his mother get decapitated right in front of him, to see an arrow plunge deep into his father's forehead, but now to see his brother like this, it drove him over the edge. Tears were pouring down the Uchiha's face. He couldn't take it anymore. Sasuke! Get out of here! Itachi screamed. The Yama. Boom! Itachi exploded, taking the main house with him. The building collapsed down onto the courtyard, covering the dead bodies and killing a few of the assassins as well. Sasuke was now crying and screaming out, but no sound left his throat. He was being guarded by Hatake Kakashi and Maeda Guy of the Kogen Kishi. Naruto dodged a quick slash from an enemy shinobi and dug a kunai into the man's chest, cutting out his heart. But because of the slow-acting poison in his system, he wasn't able to react fast enough, and took a ninjutsu to the chest, barely missing his heart. Naruto couldn't even cry out in pain since the attack forced the air from his lungs. Naruto! Ino screamed. The golden-haired girl charged forward for her husband, but she didn't even make it halfway. A katana was stabbed through her left side and exited through her right. A thick trail of blood poured from her mouth as her eyes slowly trailed over to her assailant. Kei Kurotsuchi Yamauchi. Ino gasped as Kuro stabbed the blade further into Ino's body. Indeed, Yamanaka. Indeed. Kuro growled as she tore the blade from Ino's body. Already the assassins were exiting the area through the various exit points, but Kurotsuchi realized that she was missing someone. That someone happened to be her brother. The courtyard was drenched in blood and piled high with bodies. Enemy and ally, but there were 8 people still present. Kushina was willing herself to fight against Han, Minato was struggling to keep awake, Naruto was slowly bleeding out, Kaide was knocked out, and Sasuke was being protected along with Mito and Arashi. You're more beautiful than what the stories let on, Red Death, Han drawled. Despite having 4 kids, I wonder how your feels. You're going to have to kill me first then. Kushina growled. Kushina cursed herself in her mouth. She was too weak to fight back. Han smirked and charged forward with chakra radiating off of his legs. No! Minato screamed. Ka-chan! Naruto screamed, but ended up coughing up blood. Splash! That goddamn idiot! Kurotsuchi cursed when she came to the scene. Han stood with Kushina impaled by his large Nodashi sword, emanating with steam release chakra. Kushina coughed and grunted out before Han unceremoniously wiped her off of his sword, like she was dirt. Kurotsuchi ed up her anger and grabbed her brother's arm and began to pull him towards the main exit. Kuro-chan! Naruto groaned. It was over.